So this year started out normal enough, me finding a little time here and there to build these tiny trucks. As with a lot of people though, I quickly found myself at home a lot more. This gave me the opportunity to have a more consistent build schedule, as well as pick up several new skills. This is a Toyota Tacoma Extra Cab. The body has really unique look, very indicative of the mid-1990s. I still have one of these panels laying around that I might use for a pre-runner build one day. Like so many others, I also caught the no prep bug. I got in early, so I had to piece mine together versus just buying a kit. This is a Team Associated RC10 SC6.1 team kit with new suspension arms. The team kit is pretty amazing build with an unreal amount of tunability. I started out with just some leftover electronics so I could get it out to test. My thought was to try it out with some much slower electronics before I upgraded. I really didn't want to wrap it around a tree or my ankle. One of my favorite things to build are trailers. It really doesn't matter what kind, they're just all fun. This trailer is for a friend to go behind his Yoda truggy build. He wanted a military style, but wanted it to still match the build of the truggy. I use the same paint, which happens to be leftover touch-up paint from my actual car. I also decided to make it more of an overlander look. The topper is meant to resemble a roof tent, so I just added some lumpy bits of styrene before wrapping it with canvas. The truggy has a ton of tubing, so you also needed a bit on this to match the theme. I was contacted by someone local to me to help them out with this build. Typically I don't get into Lexan builds, but I figured, I'd do them a favor. We planned on using selective 3D printed parts from RC Nerds, as well as a few custom built ones. The body was already painted as well as the interior before it was double-sided taped into the truck. It needed to be removed, and I was almost certain I'd pull the paint off, but I really lucked out and it came off clean. The build got lights in the front and rear just using some simple LED and resistors. There are a number of LED calculators out there to help you figure this out. There were no good options for bumpers, so I just made him some from some steel square tubing. The last detail was wood planking, otherwise known as vinyl, in the bed. A wooden box was made to cover up where the shocks protrude into the bed. With all the no prep seen, I should have known it wouldn't be long before someone wanted a styrene version. This is a 1967 Dodge Coronet. The builder wanted it to look like a custom version, utilizing a one-piece fiberglass front end. The idea is the entire hood, fender, wells are all connected and swivel forward at a point near where the front bumper would be. The body was also close to a 1/8 scale size, which means when done, it barely fits on the workbench. Like most of these builds, much of the main panels are vacuum formed styrene. I also have some pieces which are built up pieces of styrene cut on a Cricut machine. This is kinda like low-tech 3D printing. The best use so far I've found is for making lettering, say like on tailgates. The grill is very unique, and if I never do another one again, it'll be too soon. I've actually made 2 of these, and both took more hours than I'm willing to admit. What I do here is glue 1mm pieces of half round 1mm apart from each other. These are placed vertical and go from one end to the other. Then the grill gets painted black, and 1mm tape gets placed in between each of the vertical half round pieces. You spray a top coat of chrome, and when removed, it really gives you that look of a grill with the black in the background. Every once in a while I get a build on an RC for me. This year I was pretty lucky. I had several through the year, including this Ford COE rat rod. This build started a long time before I started shaping parts. RC Everyday and I did a collab on a Peterbilt build. While doing this research, I stumbled upon the wonderful world of COEs, especially the one Welder Up Vegas did, called Fermented Fruit. I wanted to make a tribute which followed the same aesthetic but deviates enough to make it my own. When I make a build, I keep the parts in storage bins with the documentation. This build had a bin that I would throw pieces in over a few years before I felt I was ready. The key piece is a diesel engine, which is a plaque that I ordered off of eBay. The chassis is custom built with scraps of metal and other chassis pieces. I wanted it to be low, so I borrowed the front end style from RC Everyday. I really like the look of the welder up makes. They keep the original patina but encapsulated under a clear coat. This is what I attempted, with the only difference being I had to make the patina first. I think this cab has the best looking grille of any vehicle, in my opinion. The shapes are just so perfect, and I think this one came out really close to replicating that. Even though you cannot see it, I spent quite a bit of effort on the interior. From airplane seats to salvage road sign floor patches, I did my best to give it that rat rod vibe. The coolest piece is a print on fabric of a pinup girl that is made into a headliner. I had another request come in for help with a Lexan body. This time what I did was make a styrene bed which matches up to a Lexan cab. The main body is fairly simple since it's just right angles made into a box. For the fenders I shaped MDF into a form which was used to vacuum form the styrene pieces. These were then glued into place on the bed. I made both fenders whole or complete, but the customer wanted the spare tire mounted in the fender, which means I had to cut it down. I utilized metal cookie cutter rings, which is a great tip from Adam Savage on Tested. I was able to use the cutter not only to make the fender, but help shape the styrene. The Lexan cab received some 3D printed parts from RC Nerds to give it an amazing look and make it quite a unique truck. Several years ago I built a Dodge M37. This was before I had a list of people to work through, and I was just building trucks and hoped they would sell. I was super proud of the M37 and still really liked the way it turned out. However, when I got a chance to build another one, I realized just how much I had learned over these last few years. One of the coolest parts was the customer was rebuilding their M37 at the same time I was building the RC. I got to see the build process and really tailor the truck to look exactly like his. The first build was scratch built, except for the roof. The second one had molds made for the cab and some for the bed. I also used some 3D printed parts to help with parts which are hard and time consuming to build. Even with that, there's still a lot of scratch building to take place. One such area is in the front of the grille. I cut thin strips of metal to get the main structure. The metal from marker flags, like the ones used to mark where not to dig, was used for the bars. When you first glance, there isn't much to see on the build, but after several hours of placing small rivets and bolts, my mind was changed. There is so much detail on this, it's just super tiny. Most of the M37s, including the real one being built, have canvas tops. I made a cage with a few brass shapes soldered into place to give the main structure. Just like the real one, a piece was made to give the canvas top a round shape above the door. The structure was tied into the window and makes the cab very solid. I mentioned earlier that I made 2 Dodge Coronet grills. Well, here's the second. This is a replica of a friend's Coronet he is restoring. The restoration is mainly around the mechanical side, so the barn find look is being kept. The real one has decent paint, but the shine is gone. There are a few streaks where the chrome leached down the paint. There's a slight surface rust and a few spots where it looked like something was spilled on the car and damaged the paint. Several techniques were used here, but one of my favorites is using weathering oils. A good friend of mine asked for a Jeep build back at a Recon G6 in 2019. I typically don't get into builds which have an existing body, and Lord knows there is enough Jeep bodies out there being produced. However, this particular Jeep, to my knowledge, has never been mass produced. This is the Jeep DJ5 Postal version. The build is modeled after a 1-to-1 rock crawler from Texas called LS Mail. At the time he asked, I had never heard of the real rock crawler nor the DJ5 Postal variant. Just a few minutes researching and I knew this had to happen. A year later we met up again at the 2020 Recon G6, which was one of the few events I was able to make. We worked out all the details and I started planning out the build. The body is unique due to the nose extension and shape of the slats. The USPS wanted a Jeep with a little more power, but to get that, Jeep needed more room under the hood. Instead of changing the shape, they simply added to the grille lengthwise. One of the most fun parts about this build is becoming friends with the guy who built the real LS Mail. Tim was gracious enough to offer details, behind the scene pictures, and stories to make the scale version as realistic as possible. The final product is one of my favorite builds to date. Another friend needed some help with the project he was putting together. This build had already been mostly completed, but was missing an interior. The concept was a large tire caged crawler with a number of high-end components. The back wall of the cab had to be placed in first, and the body snaked in afterwards. I decided that magnets could be placed on the back wall and the cab to snap them into alignment. The cage would keep the pieces from falling even if the magnets were momentarily jostled loose. Even though the overall footprint of this truck is massive, the available amount of space for electronics is small. The rear section was chosen to house a battery box, which was camouflaged as a rear bed. I like to do collabs with other people on YouTube and social media. I had met Hemystorm a few years back at Motorama. I connected with him and worked out a plan for a build, which is this van. He wanted a van which was off-road capable, as well as one that could be used for camping. In hindsight, we probably started planning our van build about the same time Proline started their van designs, although they did beat us to the punch by a few months to start this van life craze. The van is modeled after a mid-90s full-size Ford van. I was able to scale it up enough that the molded in fender extensions gave it just the right track width. The roof also has an extension which in the real world would pop up and give extra head height to the van, but in this one it's just glued in place. I wanted to go a little extra for this, so the hood and one door opens. It's always difficult to have opening components. For one reason, the structure becomes weaker and needs additional bracing. The biggest reason, though, is panel gaps. When a door hood closes, it has to align perfectly. There is no tugging and pushing into place before adding glue. I'm very happy with this build and cannot wait to see what Hemystorm does with it. I'm typically not one that jumps on bandwagons, especially early on. However, I just couldn't help myself with the 2021 Ford Bronco from New Bright. There were amazing builders like Todd Norton who are making pieces for this body. I just wanted to go a little bit of a different route though. So International Harvester years ago was copied by Ford, and from that came the original Bronco. Decades later, a designer online dreamed up of what happens if the roles were reversed for this new build. So they sketched out what a 2021 International Harvester Scout would look like. On the surface, it's very simple, but there are a ton of changes between the bodies. From first glance, I fell in love and knew I wanted one. I get quite a few requests for strange vehicles, or at least strange to someone with a background in crawling. I've actually made locomotive which went on an 8x8 crawler with 2.2 wheels. This was along that line, but at least a little more in the realm of possibility. This is an International Lone Star Semi with a sleeper cab. As hard as I tried, there was little data available online for me, so I ended up buying a 1/43rd scale model to use as reference. After determining the scale, I went with my calipers and a pencil and started drawing out the sketch. Oftentimes people building just need a little helping hand. This truck was envisioned as a dually, but they needed help getting there. After calculating the scale, the body was cut and lengthened. I used the cutoffs from the fenders to make the dually fenders, which would be glued in place. The end result of a truck which looks pretty close to the factory dually would, and a very happy customer. As mentioned before, I get quite a few crazy build requests. Some I even take on. For example, the VW Bug trailer. This started out as a Baja Bug, which was cut in half. I then added back in styrene to enclose the front section. I could have just squared it off, but I thought a rounded section would look the best. Since this was going to be a trailer, it had to have an opening to access the storage area. The new curved part was cut and the hinges were added so it would swing forward. This belongs to my friend and he was looking for a very specific color. Luckily, it's easy to order custom mixed rattle cans, which is what I did here. The headlights end up becoming the taillights with just a little simple LED system which I installed. To tie it to the vehicle, a coupler from Pushrod 3D was used. These couplers were designed for me a few years back, and they're designed to go into a trailer and mount up to the axial trailer hitch. I was hoping for a cool looking piece, but what I ended up with was a coupler as the best on the market, hands down. My last major build of the year was a Dodge Power Wagon crew cab. Going in, I didn't realize that the wheelbase is identical for the regular cab and the crew cab versions. Dodge simply shortened the bed to give room for the extra cab. As you can imagine, I have quite a collection of vacuum molds. I got lucky on this one since the front and rear fenders both were the same as the M37 build I just finished earlier this year. There was still lots to do since the customer was looking for an opening hood. With the design, the best I could do was opening one side. Otherwise, the front end would probably just snap off one day. I also use a technique I borrowed from Harley Designs. This is when you create a mold, which can then be used to form thin aluminum into shapes. I used it here to make the louvers for the hood. This piece of thin aluminum was grafted on styrene for strength and blended into the body. The crew cab is a cool build, and best part, I can use it to make a regular cab with just a few small tweaks. So this has been a crazy year, and I am very glad to see it go. However, one blessing I received was more time with my wife and more time building tiny trucks. I have so much more I want to get accomplished, and I am looking forward to a lot of fun builds in 2021. Until then, we'll see you in the rocks.